All right, in this video, we'll be looking at functional anatomy part two of the respiratory system. We'll be mostly looking at the lower respiratory system, sans lungs. So we'll be looking at the larynx, trachea, bronchi in this video. In the next video, we'll look a little bit more at the bronchi and then mostly spending that time looking at the lungs. This section, this lower respiratory system, is broken into two zones. The respiratory zone, this is the site of gas exchange. This consists mostly of microscopic structures such as tiny bronchioles and alveoli. And then there is the conducting zone. The conducting zone is basically, think of this as like conduits that transport gas to and from gas exchange sites. And these include things like the trachea and the bronchi. And they basically warm the air, humidify the air, get it ready for the lungs, but they don't serve any kind of gas exchange purposes. So first, we'll look at the larynx. Sometimes it is known as the voice box. It is, you can see it there on that dude's neck. It's about, extends from the third to sixth cervical vertebra, attaches to the hyoid bone. Remember the hyoid bone from the skeletal system, the bone that doesn't attach to any muscles. It's too busy attaching to the larynx to attach, or no, to attach to other bones. It attaches to muscles and the larynx. Um, the larynx opens up into the laryngopharynx and continues down into the trachea. Three functions of the larynx. It provides a patent airway, which basically the word patent airway is just this idea of keeping the trachea open so that it is the mouth or the nose have an outside uh, exposure to the lungs. It keeps the airway open, basically. It provides also route for food to go through, and there's a place where that splits off. And it also does voice production. So there's that. And part of the larynx, see if we can see it here. We can't see it here. Is the epiglottis. And the epiglottis, you can see it right there, up there. Wish I had a side view of it. The epiglottis is basically a little flap that covers the trachea when you swallow. And so this is kind of how food and air are separated. And if you don't do that, obviously that's what choking is. A little bit about voice production. And so basically, speech, if you think about speech, it is just intermittent releases of air. Um, your brain and your body all have to work together to make the words come out, but the sound just has to do with the stretching of these cords inside the larynx. They're called your vocal cords, and the pitch of your voice is determined by the length of those cords, and the loudness depends upon the force that you breathe out on those. And then there are other factors that can change your voice as well, like the pharynx, the sinuses, the nasal cavity, the mouth, all those different shapes and sizes have, and then the way that your muscles are shaped when you speak also can change your voice as well. And so there's a lot of things that go into the voice, but this is primarily where that noise is made, is in the larynx. Next is the trachea. The trachea is also known as the windpipe, and it extends from the larynx down into this area known as the mediastinum, which is just the place between the two lungs, basically, and it divides into left and right bronchi. Then trachea is about 4 inches long, about 3/4 inch in diameter. It's very flexible. Remember, the trachea is covered with cartilage. There's a couple of parts of the trachea that you need to be familiar with. One of those is called the trachealis. You see that in the picture there on the right. It is consists of smooth muscle fibers, and it can attaches to this posterior section right here. And the purpose of these um, smooth muscle fibers is to, when you are coughing, they will contract and allow you to get that um, mucus up so that it doesn't get clogged into the trachea. And then there is the last part of the trachea, and I may not have the picture here. You can't really see it. It's called the carina, and it's basically the carina, Carina, and this is like the last cartilage. It's basically the last point before you get into the bronchi. So like right down here, and the carina is very sensitive, and its purpose is if it's ever touched by something that's not air, and here you can see it right here, location of carina, right down in here. And if it's touched by something that's not in the air, it will cause you to cough pretty violently, and it helps you to get rid of that foreign object out of the bronchi because you don't want them to get into the lungs, which would be really bad. And speaking of bronchi, the bronchi are basically branches, and that's hence the word bronchi. And so you get your trachea, and it branches out into right and left bronchi, and then undergoes about 23 more orders of branching. So there's lots of branching that happen in this, what is called the bronchial tree. And this is where the conducting zone ends and the respiratory zone begins. At the very ends or the terminal ends of these bronchi. And so we're going to look at the respiratory zones next time, but for the conducting zones, we're going to basically the trachea divides again left and right, and the right branch is actually shorter. You can see that on this picture. As this is if we're looking at someone here, and the it's a lot more vertical than the left. The left kind of goes off here to the side, and then as you can see, those branches become smaller and smaller and smaller to where the bronchioles, which are these tiny little branches, are about a millimeter in diameter. And then you get to this area called the terminal bronchioles, which is the last bronchioles, which are about half a millimeter in diameter. And so that's when you get into the respiratory zone where the actual gas exchange is going to occur.